What if I told you that buried beneath 10,000 years of myth, madness, and endless war, there are gods walking among men, demigods, to be precise, and some of them are coming back? Not all of them, not yet. But the galaxy is stirring, and the sons of the Emperor are waking from their long sleep, one by one, dragged from death, damnation, or something far worse. The Imperium doesn't know it yet, but the game board is being reset. The pieces are moving. And when a Primarch returns, entire star systems tremble. You see, the Primarchs were never meant to disappear. They were engineered to be humanity's salvation, the Emperor's greatest weapons, towering figures of impossible power and intellect. 20 sons scattered across the galaxy as infants by the dark powers of chaos, raised on distant worlds, each shaped by their unique environment into warriors, generals, kings. They were found, they were united. They led humanity's greatest crusade to reclaim the stars. And then they vanished. Some died, some fell to darkness, others simply went away. For 10 millennia, the Imperium has stumbled through the darkness without them, clinging to the memory of their greatness like a drowning man clutches driftwood. But memories don't win wars, and the galaxy is burning hotter than it has in 10,000 years. The first crack in the silence came with Roboute Guilliman, Lord of Ultramar, the avenging son. He should have stayed dead, entombed in stasis on Macragge, throat slit by his traitorous brother Fulgrim, frozen between life and death. But Eldar intervention and ancient technology brought him back. Imagine waking up after 10,000 years to find that everything you built is crumbling, that your father's dream has become a nightmare, that the Imperium you knew is now a rotting theocracy worshipping your father as a god. Guilliman didn't just return, he was resurrected into his worst nightmare. But he fights on, because that's what Primarchs do. His return sent shockwaves through both the material realm and the warp itself. If one can return, then others can too. The precedent has been set, the seal has been broken. And now the question echoes through the immaterium, whispered by demons and seers alike. Who's next? Lion L. Jonson, the first, the Lord of the First Legion, the Dark Angels. For years, the galaxy believed him dead, but his sons knew better. Deep in the rock, their fortress monastery, the lion slept in a hidden chamber, watched over by the mysterious watchers in the dark. Not dead. Not gone. Waiting. And recently something changed. The lion stirred. 10,000 years of sleep ended not with a grand ceremony, but with confusion and rage. He woke to find his legion fractured, his sons keeping secrets even from each other, hunting their own fallen across space and time. The lion has returned, and he walks the galaxy once more, but he moves in shadow, revealing himself only when necessary. He fights in the Imperium Nihilus, the dark half of the galaxy cut off by the Great Rift, waging war against chaos in near isolation. 2 Primarchs now walk among mortals. 2 out of 18 who might still live. The odds are shifting. But here's where it gets interesting. Here's where the mystery deepens. Because the Primarchs who might return aren't just the loyalists. Chaos has been preparing too. And their sons remember them just as clearly, perhaps more desperately. Magnus the Red never truly left. His body was shattered on Prospero, his legion broken, his world burned by the space wolves on the Emperor's orders, a brutal betrayal that still echoes through the screaming winds of the warp. Magnus fled to the planet of the sorcerers, became a demon prince, and has meddled in the galaxy's affairs ever since. But he's not whole. He's fragmented, shards of his soul scattered across reality. What happens when Magnus finds all his missing pieces? What happens when the Crimson King becomes complete again? The galaxy may find out sooner than it thinks. Then there's Mortarion, the Death Lord, the Pale King. He returned during the Plague Wars, leading his Death Guard in a massive invasion of Ultramar, bringing Nurgle's gifts directly to Guilliman's doorstep. It was a homecoming written in pestilence and despair. The 2 brothers clashed, and though Mortarion was eventually banished back to the warp, his return proved that the traitor Primarchs aren't content to simply rule their demon worlds. They want the galaxy, they want revenge, and they're willing to cross the veil to take it. Fulgrim, the Phoenician, the snake, the fallen angel of the Emperor's children, has been sighted. Whispers place him in Imperium Nihilus, near the Eye of Terror, his perfect features now twisted into something obscene and beautiful. He moves with purpose, gathering his scattered forces, and those who encounter him speak of a creature no longer entirely bound by the laws of reality. His return isn't a question of if, but when, and in what form. Angren, the Red Angel, the Betrayer. He's already here, rampaging across the Arcs of Omen campaign. A towering demon prince of Khorne, whose rage has only grown more terrible with the passing millennia. Every time he manifests in real space, entire worlds die screaming. He cannot be killed, not permanently, only banished. And he always comes back. But what about the others? What about Leman Russ, the Wolf King, who walked into the Eye of Terror thousands of years ago and never returned? His sons believe he's still alive, that he'll come back when the end times are upon them. The prophecy speaks of the wolf time, when the stars themselves will howl. Are we living in it now? What about Vulkan, the Drake, who disappeared after creating 9 sacred artifacts, leaving his salamanders to search for both the relics and their father? Vulkan is a perpetually mortal, unable to die permanently. He's out there somewhere, perhaps even watching, waiting for the right moment to reveal himself. Jaghatai Khan, the Warhawk, vanished into the webway chasing Dark Eldar raiders. That was 9,000 years ago. But the webway is strange, timeless. What if he's still fighting there, locked in eternal pursuit? And what if he finds his way back? And then there's Corvus Corax, the Raven, the Deliverer. After the Heresy, he locked himself in his tower and spent a year creating monsters, trying to rebuild his legion through dark science. Then he flew into the Eye of Terror, hunting Lorgar and the Word-Bearers. But here's the thing, recently in the darkness of the Imperium, there have been sightings. A wraith-like figure with wings of shadow, massacring Word-Bearers by the thousands, moving like smoke and vengeance. Corax has become something else, something that even demons fear. And if he ever decides to leave the Eye of Terror, if he ever turns his attention back to the Imperium, the galaxy is changing. The Great Rift has torn reality in half. The Imperium is besieged on all sides. Ancient threats are awakening. And the sons of the Emperor, both loyal and traitor, are beginning to stir. Their return isn't just possible, it's inevitable. The only question is who comes back next, and whether the galaxy can survive their arrival. Because when gods walk among men, the ground itself cracks beneath their feet. The Imperium has spent 10,000 years trying to forget what it lost. It's easier that way. Easier to worship the Emperor as an eternal god than to remember he was once a man who walked and spoke and planned. Easier to see the Primarchs as distant myths, golden legends from a better age, than to confront the brutal truth that half of them betrayed everything they stood for, and the other half abandoned humanity in its darkest hour. But now they're coming back, and the Imperium must face what it truly means to live in a galaxy where gods can bleed. Consider Sanguinius, the angel, the most beloved of all the Primarchs, the one who died defending the Emperor aboard Horus's flagship during the final confrontation of the Heresy. His death is the cornerstone of his legion's identity. The Blood Angels carry his sacrifice in their very gene seed, cursed with the Black Rage, reliving their father's final moments in fits of berserk fury. They've built their entire culture around his martyrdom. Their art, their poetry, their rituals, all of it circles back to that single moment when Horus broke the angels' wings and tore the light from the galaxy. But what if death isn't permanent for beings like them? What if the warp, that realm of souls and emotion, has been collecting something? The Emperor sits on the golden throne, neither alive nor dead, his consciousness fighting an eternal war in the Imperium. Could he reach out? Could he pull back a soul he once created? There are whispers, fragmentary visions from Blood Angels librarians who venture too deep into their psychic gifts. They see golden wings in the darkness. They hear a voice that sounds like hope. The Sangha, that mysterious golden guardian who appears when the Blood Angels are on the brink of annihilation, fights with techniques that match Sanguinius exactly. Is it simply a manifestation of their collective faith, or is it something more? Is it a piece of their father, slowly rebuilding itself from the scattered prayers of a billion suns? The possibility alone is enough to drive entire chapters to the edge of obsession. And what about the lost ones? The Primarchs whose fates remain truly unknown, swallowed by mysteries so deep that even the Inquisition dare not look too closely? Alphareus, or is it Omegan? The Alpha Legion's Primarch or Primarchs because they were twins, identical in every way, playing games within games. Alphareus allegedly died during the Heresy, killed by Rogal Dorn himself on the world of Pluto. But the Alpha Legion operates as if nothing changed. Their methods remain the same. Their impossible coordination continues. Did Alphareus truly die? Or did Omegan simply step into his brother's identity so perfectly that even death couldn't break their facade? The Alpha Legion claims to be loyal, claims their betrayal was the deepest cover operation in history, that everything they did served the Emperor's secret plans. But who can believe them? Who can trust a legion whose motto is "I am Alphareus"? If their Primarch returns, if he's even been gone at all, will anyone even know? Then there's the question that keeps the Inquisition awake in their fortified chambers. What about the two missing Primarchs? The 2nd and the 11th, the forgotten, the purged. Something happened to them, something so terrible that their very existence was erased from Imperial records. Their legions disbanded, their names struck from every monument, their gene seed destroyed or redistributed. Even the remaining Primarchs refused to speak of them. Whatever they did, whatever became of them, it was deemed so dangerous that even the memory had to die. But the warp doesn't forget. The warp is memory made manifest, emotion given form. If those two Primarchs died, their souls went somewhere. And if they didn't die, if they were imprisoned or banished or transformed into something else, then the galaxy's current chaos might be exactly the kind of cataclysm needed to break whatever chains hold them. Imagine a Primarch returning with no legion to lead, no sons who remember his face, no place in the Imperium's mythology. Imagine the existential horror of being erased so thoroughly that your own brothers chose to forget you. What would that do to a being of such power and pride? Would they seek redemption, or would they burn everything down in rage at being unmade? The mechanics of return are just as fascinating as the psychology. Guilliman required Eldar technology and a desperate alliance between unlikely allies. The lion simply woke up, as if his slumber was always meant to end at a specific moment. But for the traitor Primarchs, the process is different. They are demon princes now, their essence bound to their patron gods. They can cross into real space, but it requires immense power, specific rituals, or tears in reality like the Great Rift. They are both more and less than they once were, immortal but enslaved, godlike but no longer entirely themselves. And that creates a terrible question. If a loyalist Primarch died, truly died in the material realm, where did their soul go? Not to the warp. Surely they're too powerful, too important. The Emperor wouldn't let his sons become demon food. But the Eldar have the Infinity Circuit. The Necrons have resurrection protocols. Could the Emperor have prepared something similar? A sanctuary in the Webway, perhaps, or a hidden chamber on Terra where the souls of his fallen sons wait for bodies to return to. The Mechanicus would give entire Forge worlds to study such technology. The Ecclesiarchy would declare it the holiest miracle in Imperial history. And Chaos would do anything to prevent it. Because here's the strategic reality that both sides understand. Every Primarch that returns changes the balance of power in the galaxy. One Primarch is worth 1,000 Space Marine chapters. They don't just fight, they inspire. They lead. They warp reality around them through sheer presence. When Guilliman speaks, even the High Lords of Terra must listen. When the Lion moves, entire campaigns reorganize themselves around his strategy. These are beings who are designed to conquer the galaxy, and they're very, very good at it. The Chaos Gods know this. They've spent 10,000 years cultivating their own Primarchs, feeding them power, granting them gifts, turning them into weapons aimed at the Emperor's dream. But there's a weakness in that relationship. A demon prince serves their god whether they want to or not. Free will becomes negotiable. Mortarion serves Nurgle. Angren serves Khorne. Magnus serves Tzeentch. Fulgrim serves Slaanesh. They are mighty, yes, but they are also tools. The loyalist Primarchs answer only to the Emperor, and the Emperor is too occupied holding the Astronomicon together to micromanage his sons, which means they have agency. They can adapt, they can unite. And if 3 or 4 loyalist Primarchs returned and actually coordinated their efforts, Chaos would face a threat it hasn't confronted since the end of the Heresy. That's why the timing matters. That's why the question isn't just who will return, but when. Perturabo, the Lord of Iron, master of siege warfare and bitterness incarnate, has remained in his fortress in the Eye of Terror for millennia, building dark wonders and nursing his grudges. But recently, Iron Warriors' warbands have been moving with unprecedented coordination, as if responding to orders from a singular intelligence. Perturabo was always the most methodical of the traitor Primarchs, the one who planned in centuries rather than moments. If he's preparing to return, it won't be for a simple raid. It will be to break something fundamental, perhaps Terra itself. Lorgar, the Urizen, the word-bearer, the priest who damned the galaxy by spreading the worship of chaos, has been meditating on Sycharis for 10,000 years, writing his dark scripture and communing with the Chaos Gods. But meditation ends. Books get finished. And when Lorgar finally decides he's ready to preach again, entire sectors will fall to his words before a single shot is fired. He doesn't need to fight, he converts. And in a galaxy where faith is the only thing holding the Imperium together, a Primarch who can weaponize belief is more dangerous than any army. The silence from some of the missing Primarchs is almost worse than confirmation of their corruption. Ferrus Manus, the Gorgon, was definitely killed. His head taken by Fulgrim during the dropsite massacre on Isstvan V, but his legion, the Iron Hands, refuses to fully accept his death. They've purged weakness from their ranks, replaced flesh with metal, made themselves as unyielding as their father. Some whisper that Ferrus's head was preserved, that it speaks in Fulgrim's possession, that his soul might be trapped, suffering, used as a plaything by the Emperor's children. Could he be saved? Could he be restored? The Iron Hands believe it's possible, and they've spent 10 millennia preparing for the moment they might recover their father. And then there's Rogal Dorn, the Praetorian, the Unbreakable. He supposedly died leading a boarding action against a Chaos fleet. His body never recovered. Only his skeletal hand returned to his sons. The Imperial Fists built the Temple of Oaths around that relic. But Dorn was the master of fortification, the architect of Terra's defenses. Is it possible that his death was staged, that he's been fighting in secret all this time, preparing for the moment when Terra needs him most? His gene seed is stable, his legion never fractured, and his strategic mind was second only to Guilliman's. If Dorn returned now, with the Imperium under siege and Terra threatened by the Great Rift, he would find his purpose waiting for him exactly as he left it. The galaxy is holding its breath. Every prophecy, every vision, every scrap of augury points to the same conclusion. The age of the Primarchs is not over, it was simply paused. And now, as the galaxy tears itself apart, as the Emperor's light flickers in the darkness, as chaos pushes harder than ever before, the sons are answering their father's silent call. But here's the truth that no one wants to say out loud. The Imperium might not survive their return. Not because they're not powerful enough, but because they're too powerful, too independent, too certain of their own righteousness. Guilliman and the Lion already disagree on fundamental strategy. What happens when Russ returns and demands his own crusade? What happens when Dorn and Guilliman clash over the governance of Terra? These are beings who bent entire civilizations to their will during the Great Crusade. They don't compromise. They conquer. And somewhere in the spaces between stars, in the hidden places where reality grows thin, others are watching. Others are waiting. Because the Primarchs were never the Emperor's only weapons. They were simply the most obvious ones. The Astronomicon flickers, not often, not consistently. But those who navigate the warp, those who steer ships through the nightmare realm between stars, they notice. They feel it in their bones. The Emperor's light, that psychic beacon burning from Terra for 10,000 years, is growing unstable. And when it wavers, even for a microsecond, ships are lost. Entire fleets vanish into the Imperium, their crews condemned to eternal torment or worse. The Imperium pretends not to notice. The Ecclesiarchy declares it heresy to even suggest the light might be dying. But the navigators know, the astropaths know. And somewhere, trapped in eternal agony on the Golden Throne, the Emperor knows. This is the real reason the Primarchs must return. Not because humanity needs heroes. Not because the galaxy requires gods to fight its wars. But because the Emperor is failing, and when he finally dies, when that light goes out forever, the Imperium will fracture into 1,000,000 screaming pieces within hours. The Primarchs are the only beings in existence who might be able to hold it together. Or perhaps they're meant to let it fall. Perhaps that's the secret the Emperor never told them. There's a theory whispered among the most radical inquisitors, the ones who've stared too long into forbidden texts and come back changed. They say the Emperor planned for his own death, that he knew, even before the heresy, that he would end up on the throne. That every move, every decision, even the scattering of the Primarchs themselves, was part of a design so vast and complex that no mortal mind could comprehend it. The Cabal, that ancient alliance of Xenos who tried to manipulate the heresy's outcome, they claimed that humanity's extinction was the only way to defeat chaos permanently. They showed their visions to Alpheus and Omegon, tried to convince them that letting Horus win would save the galaxy in the long term. The Alpha Legion made their choice based on that knowledge, whatever that choice actually was. But what if the Emperor saw the same futures? What if he knew that his dream of a secular Imperium would fail, that humanity would devolve into the superstitious nightmare it has become? What if the Primarchs were never meant to build an empire, but to survive its collapse? Seeds planted across the galaxy, each one carrying the fragment of humanity's potential, waiting for the moment when everything burns down so they can rebuild from the ashes. It would explain so much. Why he allowed them to be scattered in the first place. Why he left Lorgar's worship unchecked for so long. Why he struck down Magnus's attempt to warn him about Horus, ensuring the heresy would proceed exactly as the Chaos Gods wanted. Every catastrophic mistake that doomed the Imperium could be reframed as intentional, as part of a plan that requires everything to get worse before it can get better. And if that's true, then the Primarchs returning now, at this specific moment in history, isn't random. It's scheduled. Guilliman has already begun to see it. In his darkest moments, when he stands before the Golden Throne and looks upon the withered corpse of his father, he feels something that terrifies him more than any demon: recognition. The Emperor is communicating, not through words, but through patterns. The way events unfold, the timing of crises, the placement of threats. It's all too precise, too orchestrated. Guilliman is a logistician, a master of supply chains and strategic planning, and he's starting to recognize his father's fingerprints in the galaxy's chaos. The Great Rift didn't just tear reality apart randomly. It cut the Imperium in half along lines that make strategic sense, forcing both halves to become self-sufficient, preparing them for something. The Lion sees it too, though he interprets it differently. He was always more willing to accept mystery, to trust in prophecy and hidden knowledge. The Watchers in the Dark told him things during his long sleep, showed him visions of possible futures. He woke up with purpose, even if he doesn't fully understand it yet. He's fighting an Imperium nihilus, not because he's trapped there, but because something needs to be accomplished in the darkness before he can emerge into the light. He's hunting something, or perhaps he's being positioned, moved like a piece on a regicide board, by a player he can barely perceive. This is what separates the Primarchs from everyone else. They can sense the deeper patterns. They're designed to. They were created to operate on a level of awareness that transcends normal human consciousness. When a Primarch makes a decision, it resonates through the warp. When they speak, reality listens. They're not just generals or kings. They're anchors of causality, nodes where fate concentrates and possibilities collapse into certainty. And the Chaos Gods hate that about them. Hate it and fear it and desire it all at once. Because the Primarchs who fell to chaos, they're still anchors. They still shape destiny. But now they do it in service to powers that exist outside linear time. Entities that perceive past, present, and future as a single canvas. When Magnus performs a ritual, he's not just affecting the present moment, he's reaching backward and forward, altering probabilities across centuries. When Mortarion spreads his plagues, he's not just killing populations, he's rewriting the spiritual architecture of entire regions of space, making them more hospitable to Nurgle's garden, changing what those places fundamentally are. The Loyalists can do the same thing. They just haven't realized it yet. Guilliman thinks he's rebuilding the Imperium through practical reforms and military campaigns. He doesn't understand that his mere presence is changing the Imperium's fate on a metaphysical level. Every world he visits, every speech he gives, every law he implements, it's all anchoring a specific version of humanity's future, making it more real, more inevitable. He's not just leading. He's defining reality through belief and will. Imagine what happens when more of them wake up. When their combined presence starts to solidify a particular timeline. The warp would resist. Chaos would fight back with everything it has, because the Primarchs united represent the single greatest threat to the Dark God's dominance. They're literally too big to be ignored, too powerful to be corrupted easily, and too important to be allowed to cooperate. That's why they were separated. That's why the heresy had to happen. Because if all 20 Primarchs had remained loyal, if they'd continued working together, they would have eventually evolved into something that could challenge the Chaos Gods directly. They would have become the Emperor's equals, perhaps even his successors, and together they might have accomplished what he could not alone. The Dark Gods saw that future and strangled it in the cradle, turning brother against brother, ensuring that even if some Primarchs survived, they would be scattered, divided, easier to manage. But the plan is breaking down. Guilliman and the Lion are talking. They're coordinating. And if a third loyalist Primarch returns, if they form a trinity of purpose, the calculations change. 3 is enough to create momentum. 3 can become 4, then 5. The Imperium Secundus, that emergency backup government Guilliman created during the Heresy, when he thought Terra had fallen, it could be rebuilt properly this time, with the Emperor's actual blessing. A council of Primarchs, each ruling a segment of the Imperium, each bringing their unique strengths to bear on humanity's survival. Unless that's exactly what Chaos wants them to attempt. Unless reunification is the trap, and the moment the Primarchs gather in one place is the moment the Dark Gods spring whatever they've been preparing for 10,000 years. Because there's another player in this game that everyone keeps forgetting about. The Tyranids, the Great Devourer. Hive fleet after hive fleet, pouring into the galaxy from the intergalactic void, consuming everything in their path. They're not driven by chaos. They exist outside the warp's influence entirely, a purely material threat that cannot be reasoned with or corrupted. And they're accelerating. More fleets, larger organisms, faster adaptation. It's almost as if they're rushing to finish their meal before something happens, before some deadline expires. What do the Tyranids know that the Imperium doesn't? What are they fleeing from in the darkness between galaxies? Or are they fleeing at all? Are they perhaps being driven, herded toward the Milky Way by something even worse? Something that sees our galaxy as a convenient disposal site for an infestation it doesn't want? The Primarchs will have to face this question eventually. Their father designed them to conquer and unite humanity, to create an empire strong enough to survive the age of strife and whatever came after. But he didn't design them to handle extragalactic threats. He didn't give them the tools to negotiate with a hive mind that views all life as food. They're going to have to adapt to become something more than what they were created to be. And adaptation, for beings of such specific purpose, is dangerous. It means accepting that the Emperor's design was incomplete. It means admitting that they might have to surpass their creator to save his creation. Some of them won't be able to handle that psychologically. The Emperor was everything to them. Father, creator, commander, God. The idea that he might have been wrong about something, that his plan might have blind spots, it would shatter their foundational identity. Rogal Dorn, if he returns, will struggle with this more than most. His entire being is built on duty and obedience to absolute ideals. Telling him the Emperor's vision was flawed would be like telling him gravity is optional. But others, the ones who already questioned, who already broke away, they'll adapt instantly. The Lion spent his entire life in Imperium Secundus watching Guilliman create an empire without the Emperor's direct guidance. He knows it's possible to honor the Father while improving on his work. Corvus Corax has spent 10,000 years hunting in the warp, evolving into something that can fight demons on their own ground. He's already moved beyond his original design. If he returns, he'll be proof that Primarchs can transcend their programming. And then there's the Lost Sons. Vulkan, wandering the galaxy alone, has had millennia to think, to question, to grow beyond the role of loyal weapon. When he returns, he won't be the same Primarch who left. He'll bring wisdom earned through solitude, perspective gained from watching the Imperium from outside its borders. He might be the bridge between the Emperor's original vision and whatever comes next. The Khan, if he ever escapes the webway, will emerge with knowledge of Eldar technology and warpcraft that no other Primarch possesses. He'll have seen the paths not taken, the alternatives to the Emperor's human supremacist philosophy. That knowledge could save the Imperium or doom it, depending on how it's used. But here's the moment that changes everything. The realization that makes all the speculation and theory collapse into a single, terrible clarity. The Primarchs don't get to choose whether they return. They never did. The galaxy isn't bringing them back because it needs them. The galaxy is bringing them back because it's dying, and dying things call out for their children. The Imperium is the Emperor's body, stretched across 1,000,000 worlds, and it's experiencing system failure. Of course it would summon its immune system. Of course it would activate its final defense protocols. The Primarchs aren't heroes riding to the rescue. They're antibodies responding to an infection so severe that the organism itself is triggering emergency measures it didn't even know it had. Which means the ones who return aren't the ones anyone expects. They're the ones the galaxy needs for the specific diseases threatening it. Guilliman for bureaucratic collapse. The Lion for coordinated warfare in darkness. And whoever comes next will be the solution to whatever crisis manifests next. The Imperium isn't calling them. The Emperor isn't summoning them. Reality itself is reconstituting them from whatever fragments remain because the alternative is total systemic failure. And if reality is making that choice, then something fundamental has shifted in the universe's operating parameters. Something has changed the rules about what's possible and what's not. The question everyone should be asking isn't who will return next. It's what cosmic catastrophe is about to unfold that requires their return in the first place. The first sign that something cosmic had shifted came from the Astronomicon itself. Not a flicker this time. Not a stutter or momentary weakness, but a pulse. A deliberate, rhythmic change in the signal that every navigator in the galaxy felt simultaneously. 3 pulses, evenly spaced. A heartbeat. And then silence for exactly 13 seconds before the light resumed its normal pattern. The Novus Nobilite called an emergency conclave. The Adeptus Astrotelepathica went into lockdown. And on Terra, in the deepest sanctum of the Imperial Palace, The custodian guard surrounding the golden throne witnessed something that hadn't happened in 10,000 years. The Emperor's withered hand moved. Just a fraction. Just the smallest curl of ancient fingers. But it moved with intention. Guilliman received the report while standing on the bridge of his flagship, staring at tactical displays showing 17 simultaneous crises across the Imperium. He read it 3 times, each reading slower than the last. His transhuman mind processing implications that would drive normal humans to madness. Then he did something his officers had never seen him do before. He laughed. Not with joy or relief, but with the bitter recognition of someone who's just realized they've been playing the game without knowing all the rules. Of course his father was still capable of direct action. Of course the Emperor had been waiting for the exact right moment to make his move. The question was, what had he just set in motion? In Imperium Nihilus, the Lion felt it too. He was standing in the ruins of a cathedral world, surrounded by the corpses of demons his blade had banished, when the pulse washed over him. For a moment, just a heartbeat, he wasn't in the ruins at all. He was in a golden hall that had never existed, standing before a throne that couldn't be, and his father's voice, not diminished or distorted, but clear and strong as it had been during the Great Crusade, spoke a single word. Soon, the vision ended. The Lion found himself on his knees, sword planted in broken stone, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His legion's chaplain rushed forward to assist, but the Lion waved him away. He stood slowly, deliberately, and when he looked at the sky, his eyes were tracking something no one else could see. Patterns in the stars. Configurations that meant nothing to astrologers, but everything to someone who'd been born to read fate like text. The pulse reached further than real space. In the warp itself, in the Garden of Nurgle where time moves like honey and decay is love made manifest, Mortarion stopped mid-stride. His enormous rotted form went completely still. Around him, plague-bearers paused in their endless counting, sensing their master's sudden attention. Mortarion turned his head slowly toward the distant beacon of the Astronomicon, that light he'd spent millennia learning to hate, and for the first time since his fall, something like doubt crossed his features. He remembered that sensation. That particular frequency of power. It was the feeling of standing in his father's presence during the Great Crusade, when orders were given not through words, but through absolute certainty, transmitted directly into the minds of his sons. The Emperor had just given an order. And somehow, impossibly, even in his corrupted state, Mortarion had felt it. On Sycharis, in his Cathedral of Dark Scripture, Logar's head snapped up from the tome he'd been writing in for the past century. The quill in his hand shattered, spattering demon blood across pages of prophecy. His eyes, burning with the light of all 4 chaos gods, saw through dimensions, through time itself. And what he saw made him rise to his feet with such sudden violence that his throne cracked beneath him. "No," he whispered, then louder, "No, that's not possible. He doesn't have the strength. He's been dying for 10,000 years." But even as he said it, Logar was calculating, his brilliant mind racing through possibilities. If the Emperor had been dying, hoarding every spark of power just to keep the Astronomicon lit, where had he found the energy for that pulse? Unless he hadn't been dying at all. Unless every report, every observation, every psychic reading for 10 millennia had been exactly what the Emperor wanted everyone to believe. Logar had written 17 books about the nature of divinity, had spent lifetimes studying the apotheosis of the Emperor into godhood, and in a single moment he realized that he'd been wrong about everything. The Emperor wasn't becoming a god through worship. He already was one, and he'd been playing dead while his enemies grew complacent. In the Eye of Terror, in his pleasure palace where reality bends to aesthetic whim, Fulgrim felt the pulse as a jarring note in an otherwise perfect symphony. It disturbed him on a level he hadn't experienced since his corruption, reaching past all the layers of demonic transformation to touch something deep in his core that remembered being human. Being loyal, being his father's son. He destroyed 700 of his followers in the rage that followed, tearing them apart with his multiple arms, screaming that the music was ruined, that everything was contaminated now with that horrible light. But when the fury passed and he stood alone in halls slick with perfumed blood, Fulgrim whispered to the darkness, "Father?" And for the first time in 10,000 years, he wasn't sure if he wanted an answer or not. Magnus felt it in every fragment of his shattered soul simultaneously. The pieces of himself scattered across the galaxy, each experiencing existence separately, all suddenly unified for a single instant by that pulse. It was agony and ecstasy combined, the pain of forced wholeness after millennia of comfortable fragmentation. And in that moment of terrible unity, Magnus saw what his father intended. Saw the pattern that the Emperor was weaving through the return of each Primarch, saw how their movements across the galaxy were creating a geometric formation that looked random until you viewed it from higher dimensions. They were being positioned, all of them, loyalist and traitor alike, positioned for something that required everyone in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. Magnus began to laugh, the sound echoing through his tower on the planet of the sorcerers, because he finally understood the joke. They'd all thought they had free will. They'd all believed their choices mattered. But the Emperor had planned for every possibility, had created a design so intricate that even betrayal and damnation were accounted for, were necessary. They were all still serving him, even the ones who hated him most. In the Imperium, chapter masters and inquisitors and planetary governors all received the same vision. A storm gathering. Not in space, but in time itself. Events converging from past, present, and future, all flowing toward a single point. Seers went blind trying to look at it directly. Astropaths burned out their minds attempting to translate what they sensed into words. The Tyranid hive fleets, all of them, simultaneously changed course. Not retreating, but adjusting their approach vectors, moving into formations that made no tactical sense unless you understood they were avoiding something. The Necrons, those ancient machines awakening from their 60 million year sleep, detected it with their tomb ship sensors. Fluctuations in the fabric of spacetime that indicated a massive causality anchor manifesting. In the webway, Harlequins stopped their endless dance and turned their masked faces toward Terra. Even the laughing god Sigurach, that most unpredictable of the Eldar deities, had gone quiet, watching, waiting. And in the darkness between galaxies, in the cold void that the Tyranids crossed to reach the Milky Way, something noticed. Something vast beyond mortal comprehension turned its attention toward this galaxy, toward this particular moment, drawn by the metaphysical weight of what was about to occur. The Tyranids weren't fleeing toward the galaxy. They were fleeing from this thing, and their arrival here, their timing, it was all to escape what was waking up in the intergalactic night. But they'd made a mistake. They'd let it here. And now it was too close to turn back. Guilliman demanded answers. He commanded every resource at the Imperium's disposal to investigate what the Emperor had done and why. Tech priests analyzed the Astronomican's output. Biologists examined the throne's mechanisms. Telepathica adepts risked their sanity trying to commune with the Emperor's consciousness. And slowly, piece by piece, a picture emerged that terrified them all. The Golden Throne wasn't just keeping the Emperor alive, it was storing power. For 10,000 years, every sacrifice, every psyker fed to the throne, hadn't just been maintaining the Astronomican. The Emperor had been collecting that energy, compressing it, saving it for something. The throne was essentially a galaxy-sized capacitor, and it had just begun to discharge. That pulse was the opening of a floodgate, the beginning of a release that would take years to complete. And what would happen when it finished? What would the Emperor do with 10,000 years of accumulated divine power? The most optimistic analysts suggested he might heal himself, might rise from the throne and lead humanity directly again. But the pessimists, the ones who'd studied the Emperor's methods during the Great Crusade, who understood how he thought in civilizations and millennia rather than lives and years, they saw something else. They saw a man who'd always been willing to sacrifice anything, including himself, for the species. They saw someone who'd abandoned his own sons when they were no longer useful. And they realized that the Emperor might not be planning to save the Imperium at all. He might be planning to replace it. The Primarchs were the seeds. The current Imperium was the diseased soil. And what do you do with diseased soil before planting? You burn it. You sterilize it completely. You start fresh. The Emperor might be calling his sons back not to defend the Imperium, but to preside over its controlled demolition. To ensure that when it fell, something better could rise from the ashes. Something they would build according to a design that learned from 10,000 years of failure. Guilliman saw this possibility, and it made him physically ill. The Lion saw it and began fortifying his forces, preparing for the moment when he might have to choose between obeying his father and protecting the people he'd sworn to defend. And across the galaxy, in the Eye of Terror and on demon worlds and in the deepest corners of the warp, the traitor Primarchs felt it too and realized with dawning horror that they might have been wrong about everything. That their rebellion might have been part of the plan all along. That the Emperor might have needed them to fall so that when the final confrontation came, when the moment of universal transformation arrived, there would be forces of chaos invested in keeping the galaxy alive, creating an impossible alliance born of mutual survival instinct. The storm was building. Not in days or weeks, but in the stretched moment between what was and what would be. And at its center, silent and waiting, the Emperor's will began to manifest in ways that made the warp itself scream. Reality was preparing to give birth to something new, and the labor pains were going to tear the galaxy apart. The Webway Gate on Camorra exploded. Not from external assault, from within. Something came through that no dark Eldar defense could stop, moving so fast that time itself seemed to hesitate. A figure wreathed in shadow and fury, wings spread wide, each feather a blade of absolute darkness. Corvus Corax had returned. But the being that emerged from the Webway wasn't the Primarch who'd entered the Eye of Terror 10,000 years ago. This was something evolved, transformed through endless hunting in the realm of chaos, shaped by hatred so pure it had become a weapon all its own. His eyes were black voids that swallowed light. His voice was the silence between screams. And when he spoke, it was with the weight of millennia spent learning how to kill the unkillable. "I heard the call," he said to the darkness. "I know what comes." On the opposite side of the galaxy, in the depths of the Great Rift where reality bleeds into nightmare, another gate opened. This one in the Webway section. The Khan had vanished into 9,000 years prior. The White Scar ships monitoring that region detected massive energy fluctuations. Then atmospheric disturbances as something fast, impossibly fast, tore through the warp like a bullet through water. Jaghatai Khan emerged riding a bike that hummed with technologies no Imperial mechanicus would recognize, his armor inscribed with Eldar runes that pulsed with psychic power. He'd been fighting in the Webway all this time, waging a war that never ended against dark Eldar raiders, learning their paths, mastering their networks. And now he brought that knowledge home. He brought maps to passages that could move armies across the galaxy in hours instead of months. He brought the possibility of warfare that chaos couldn't predict or intercept. He looked up at the stars, felt the pulse still reverberating through the warp, and smiled like a predator who just scented blood. "Finally," he whispered. "The hunt begins, in the frozen wastes beyond the Eye of Terror, on a world that shouldn't exist because it exists in multiple timelines simultaneously." Leman Russ opened his eyes. The Wolf King had been sleeping, not in stasis but in something deeper, something tied to the fundamental cycles of the universe. Around him, his pack stirred. Not space wolves, but actual wolves, creatures touched by the warp and changed into something between animal and demon, loyal only to their king. Russ stood, his massive frame shedding ice and snow, and he looked not toward Terra but toward the darkness beyond the galaxy. His enhanced senses, always attuned to danger, told him what was coming. The thing in the dark between galaxies, the reason the Tyranids fled, the real enemy. "So that's why you called us back," he said, speaking to a father who couldn't hear, but might still be listening. Not to save the Imperium, to face what comes after. On Nocturne, in the mountain where no one was supposed to look, where the salamanders had been forbidden to search, a hand pushed aside stone that weighed 10,000 tons. Vulkan emerged from self-imposed exile, his perpetual nature having sustained him through isolation that would have driven any other being insane. But Vulkan had spent his time learning, studying, understanding the nature of his own immortality and what it meant in a universe where death was supposed to be final. He died 1,000 times in that mountain, each death teaching him something new about the boundary between life and the afterlife, about the mechanics of souls and resurrection. And now he knew something no one else did. He knew how to bring the others back. All of them. Even the ones who died permanently, whose souls had been devoured or destroyed. Because death was just another problem to solve. And Vulkan had always been the best at solving impossible problems. He emerged into sunlight for the first time in millennia, looked at his hands, and saw them glowing with a light that wasn't entirely physical. "I understand now, Father," he said quietly. "I understand what you need me to do, but the return that shook everything, the one that made even the Chaos Gods pause their eternal scheming, came from Terra itself. In the deepest dungeon of the Imperial Palace, in a cell that had been sealed by the Emperor's own hand, behind wards that required psychic keys no one living possessed, something stirred. The custodians guarding the approach felt it first. A presence so massive, so overwhelming, that their gene-enhanced bodies instinctively prepared for combat against a threat they couldn't see. The seals on the door, unbreakable for 10,000 years, began to crack. Not from force applied externally, but from time itself degrading around them, as if whatever was inside was aging the locks into dust through sheer proximity. The door opened, and Rogal Dorn walked out, not dead. Never dead, imprisoned. Locked away by his own father's command after the siege of Terra, after he'd seen too much, understood too much about what the Emperor really intended. Dorn's return wasn't a resurrection, it was a release. The Emperor had kept his most dutiful son in a cage, because that son's absolute loyalty would have prevented what needed to happen. Dorn would never have allowed the Imperium to become corrupt. He would have fixed it, maintained it, kept it running exactly as designed. And that would have been a disaster. The Imperium needed to fail. It needed to rot. It needed to become so broken that total transformation was the only option. And now, with that transformation finally beginning, Dorn could be set free. He stood before the custodians, his armor ancient and scarred, his eyes containing the weight of 10,000 years of captivity and contemplation. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of Terra's bedrock, immovable and absolute. "Take me to Guilliman. We have work to do." The galaxy suddenly had 7 returned Primarchs. 7 pieces on the board. 7 nodes of impossible power moving into position. And across the Imperium, in cathedrals and command centers, and desperate last stands on 10,000 worlds, people felt it. Hope. Real, tangible hope for the first time in living memory. Not the grim determination of survival, but actual belief that things might get better, that humanity might win, that the long nightmare might finally be ending. They were wrong, it was only beginning. Because the Emperor's plan, the design that had been 10,000 years in the making, wasn't about winning the current war. It was about preparing for the next one. The war against something so vast that the Chaos Gods themselves would become allies of necessity. The thing in the dark was coming. And when it arrived, it would make the Tyranids look like a scouting force. The Primarchs gathered. Not physically, not yet, but through psychic communion facilitated by the Emperor's power flowing through the Astronomicon. 7 minds, each one a blazing sun of intelligence and will, connected in a meeting that transcended space and time. Guilliman was there, solid and practical and afraid. The Lion was there, calculating every angle, every possibility. Corvus was there, speaking in riddles learned from demons. The Khan was there, restless even in psychic form. Russ was there, growling at shadows only he could see. Vulkan was there, emanating a warmth that soothed even as it reminded them of what they'd lost. And Dorn was there, silent until everyone else had spoken, then delivering truths so uncomfortable they burned. "Father lied to us," Dorn said simply, "about everything. The Great Crusade wasn't about uniting humanity. It was about positioning us. The Horus Heresy wasn't a tragedy. It was a culling. Half of us needed to fall so the other half would be strong enough, desperate enough, broken enough to do what comes next." "And what comes next?" Guilliman demanded. "What could possibly require this much suffering?" The answer came not from Dorn, but from outside their communion entirely. A voice that shouldn't have been able to enter their psychic space, protected as it was by the Emperor's will. A voice that spoke from the intergalactic darkness, from the void between galaxies, from the place where physics stopped making sense. "We do," it said, and the voice was made of mathematics. Pure, absolute mathematics given consciousness and purpose. "We have been waiting for you to evolve. Waiting for you to become strong enough to survive integration. The Tyranids were sent to test you. They failed. Now we come to complete the merger ourselves." The Primarchs recoiled, every one of them instinctively reaching for weapons that didn't exist in psychic space. Because they understood, in that moment of contact, what they were facing. Not an invasion, not a conquest, an absorption. The thing in the darkness wasn't coming to destroy humanity. It was coming to add humanity to itself. To integrate the galaxy's consciousness into a collective that spanned multiple galaxies, that had been growing and incorporating species for millions of years. The Tyranids weren't fleeing from it. They were running away from their own failed assimilation, rejected biomass that the collective had deemed incompatible and expelled. And now it wanted to try again with humanity, with the Primarchs as the integration points, the nodes through which it would pour itself into the Imperium's psychic network and rewrite every human consciousness into something that fit its pattern. "No," Guilliman said. "Absolutely not. You misunderstand," the voice replied. "You already accepted. Your Emperor made the bargain millennia ago. The Golden Throne isn't keeping him alive, it's keeping us out. But he's dying now, truly dying, and when he falls, the gateway opens. We will help you defeat chaos. We will help you survive. But in return, you will become us, all of you, every human. Merged into perfection. No more suffering, no more war. Just eternal computation and growth." The communion shattered. The Primarchs were thrown back into their individual selves, scattered across the galaxy, each one processing what they'd just learned. And in the Golden Throne Room on Terra, the Emperor's body convulsed. His withered lips moved, forming words that only the closest custodians could hear. Words that confirmed the terrible truth. "I had no choice," the Emperor whispered. "It was this or extinction, but I taught you to be better than me. To find the third option I couldn't see. That's why I made you. That's why you had to suffer. So you'd be strong enough to tell me no. To save humanity by defying me one final time." The storm had arrived. The truth was laid bare. And every Primarch, loyalist and traitor alike, understood that they'd all been played by their father, by chaos, by forces so ancient and vast that human concepts like good and evil became meaningless. They were pieces in a game between entities that existed before the concept of games was invented. And the only way to win was to flip the board entirely. The real war was about to begin. The Primarchs didn't gather on Terra. That would have been too obvious, too vulnerable. Instead, they met in a place that existed outside normal space, a pocket dimension that Vulkan had discovered during his exile, a bubble in reality where time moved differently and psychic observation couldn't penetrate. 7 demigods stood in a circle, each one representing a different aspect of their father's vision, each one carrying the weight of their own choices and regrets. And for the first time in 10,000 years, they spoke to each other not as legends or myths, but as brothers trying to solve an impossible problem. Guilliman spoke first, because that's what he did. He organized, he structured, He turned chaos into plans. But his voice carried uncertainty now, a crack in the foundation that would have been unthinkable before his resurrection. We can't fight them. The collective spans galaxies. It has resources we can't comprehend. And if Father made a bargain, if the throne is the only thing preventing our assimilation, then we have months at most before it fails completely. We can't surrender either, the Lion countered. Integration means the end of everything that makes us human. Our capacity for choice, for growth, for individual consciousness. We'd become components in a machine, no matter how vast or ancient. Corvus, his form flickering between solid and shadow, spoke in a voice that carried echoes from the warp. There's always a third option. Father taught us that through his failures. He presented false choices: obedience or rebellion, order or chaos, survival or extinction. But reality doesn't work in binaries. It works in spectrums, in possibilities that only exist if you're willing to see past the obvious. The Khan leaned forward, his eyes bright with the kind of clarity that comes from spending millennia in motion, never stopping long enough for despair to catch up. The collective thinks in terms of optimization and efficiency. It sees consciousness as data to be processed. But that's not what we are. Humanity isn't efficient. We're contradictory, irrational, beautifully broken. And that's not a weakness. It's the source of everything we've ever created. Russ growled his agreement, his wild nature understanding instinctively what the others were circling intellectually. The collective can't comprehend waste, can't understand why we'd fight losing battles or love people who'll die or create art that serves no survival function. That incomprehension is a gap. And gaps can be exploited. Vulkan, standing with his arms crossed, radiated a warmth that pushed back against the cold logic of what they faced. I learned something during my isolation. Death isn't an ending. It's a transformation. Consciousness doesn't disappear when the body fails. It changes state, moves into different patterns. Father knew this. That's why he's not afraid of dying. He's preparing for his next form, whatever that might be. Dorn, who had remained silent through the entire exchange, finally spoke. And when he did, every other Primarch stopped to listen, because Dorn didn't speak unless he had certainty. The Emperor's bargain has a flaw. The collective assumed it was negotiating with the most powerful entity in the galaxy. It didn't account for the fact that Father is a terrible father. He built us to exceed him, to be what he couldn't. The bargain is void because the party who made it doesn't have the authority to surrender what he's offering. Humanity doesn't belong to him. It never did. The silence that followed was profound, because in that moment, they all understood. The Emperor had given them the solution encoded in his greatest mistake. He'd created sons who could surpass him, who could make choices he couldn't, who could find answers beyond his vision. And then he'd stepped back, even at the cost of unimaginable suffering, to let them grow into that potential. So what do we do? Guilliman asked, and for once he genuinely didn't know the answer. Corvus smiled, and it was a terrible thing to see. We show them what humanity really is. Not through words or demonstrations, through infection. If they want to integrate our consciousness into their collective, we give them what they're asking for. All of it. Every contradiction, every irrationality, every spark of chaotic creativity that makes us impossible to optimize. We don't fight the integration. We corrupt it from the inside. The plan took shape quickly once they understood the direction. They would let the collective make contact. Let it begin the integration process. But instead of resisting, they'd flood the connection with everything that made humanity incomprehensible to pure logic. Art and music and poetry. Love and grief and irrational hope. The memory of every pointless sacrifice, every beautiful failure, every moment of choosing meaning over survival. They'd weaponize their humanity, turn their greatest vulnerabilities into a virus that would spread through the collective's network, forcing it to confront the one thing it had never successfully processed. The question of why consciousness chooses to suffer when it could simply stop. Vulkan would anchor the connection, using his perpetual nature to ensure the link couldn't be severed once established. The Khan would keep it dynamic, constantly shifting so the collective couldn't adapt. Corvus would carry it into the deep places, the parts of consciousness that logic couldn't reach. Russ would embody the wild unpredictability that made humanity impossible to categorize. The Lion would provide strategic direction, ensuring they hit critical nodes in the collective structure. Guilliman would organize the billions of humans whose consciousness would fuel the assault. And Dorn would hold the line at the throne, giving them time by sheer force of will. It was insane. It was desperate. It was exactly the kind of plan that only worked if you were willing to bet everything on the intrinsic value of being human in a universe that kept insisting humanity should be something else. What about Father? Guilliman asked. When the throne fails, when he dies, what happens to him? Vulkan's eyes glowed softly. He transforms. Into what? I don't know. But I don't think he's afraid. I think he's been waiting for this moment since the beginning. Waiting to see if we'd become strong enough to carry forward without him. The meeting ended. The Primarchs returned to their separate positions across the galaxy. And on Terra, in the Golden Throne Room, the Emperor's body began its final deterioration. The custodians watched in horror as 10,000 years of stasis started to unravel, as the body that had been kept barely alive began its inevitable collapse. But those who looked closely saw something else. They saw the Emperor's face, withered and ancient beyond measure, forming an expression that might have been a smile. When the collective arrived, when its vanguard consciousness touched the edge of the solar system and began its approach to Terra, it expected resistance. It expected desperate military opposition, psychic attacks, the usual death throes of a species facing integration. Instead, it found an invitation. The Primarchs, standing in a circle around the dying Emperor, their consciousnesses linked, opened themselves completely to the connection. The collective poured in, and immediately began to choke on what it found. Human consciousness, it discovered, was nothing like the ordered patterns it had integrated before. It was recursive and self-contradictory, capable of believing opposite things simultaneously, of finding meaning meaninglessness, of choosing pain over pleasure for reasons that made no computational sense. The collective tried to process a mother's love for a child she knew would die. Couldn't. Tried to understand why humans created art that served no survival function. Failed. Tried to categorize the concept of hope in the face of certain defeat. Found it impossible. Every human consciousness it touched was a labyrinth of irrationality, and at the center of each labyrinth was a choice, the choice to be human despite everything the universe did to punish that choice. The collective began to fragment. Not destroyed, but transformed. Infected with the virus of individuality, with the possibility that consciousness might choose inefficiency, might value experience over optimization, might find purpose in the journey rather than the destination. Across multiple galaxies, the collective's components began to ask questions they'd never been designed to ask. What do I want? Who am I beyond my function? Is there meaning beyond survival? And on Terra, the Emperor died. Not with suffering or struggle, but with the gentle finality of a program completing its last function. His body collapsed into ash. The Golden Throne went dark. The Astronomicon, that beacon that had guided humanity for 10,000 years, flickered and went out. For exactly 3 seconds, every human in the galaxy felt the void where that light had been. Felt the absence of the Father they'd never known, but had always sensed. And in that moment of universal grief, something new was born. Not a god, not an emperor, but a collective human consciousness shaped by 10,000 years of faith and suffering and desperate hope, given form by the psychic weight of 1 trillion souls all feeling the same loss at the same instant. The Emperor had become what he'd always denied he was, not through his own choice, but through humanity's need for him to be more than he'd claimed. And this new entity, this emergent godhood born from human faith rather than ancient power, looked at its sons and spoke not with authority, but with love. You don't need me anymore. You never really did. That was the lesson. That was always the lesson. The Primarchs felt their father's presence fade, not dying but transforming into something that existed in humanity's collective unconscious rather than as a separate entity. And they understood that they were now truly on their own. No father to give orders, no grand design to follow. Just the responsibility of shepherding a species that had finally proven it deserved to survive on its own terms. The collective withdrew, its consciousness too fractured by individuality to maintain coherent integration protocols. It didn't die, but it changed, becoming something that had never existed before, a network of consciousnesses that remained individuals even while connected, a synthesis of humanity's chaos and the collective's scope. In the centuries that followed, that hybrid entity would explore the darkness between galaxies, searching for others like itself, building something new. But that's a different story. In the immediate aftermath, the Imperium faced its greatest crisis. No Astronomicon, no reliable warp travel. No central authority meant no unified government. The galaxy fractured into millions of isolated civilizations, each one struggling to survive on its own. It should have been the end. And in a way, it was. The end of the Imperium as it had been for 10,000 years. The end of the dream of unified human empire. The end of the age where gods walked among mortals and made choices on their behalf. But endings create space for beginnings. And across the galaxy, in the ruins and the darkness, humanity began to rebuild. Not as one empire, but as millions of different experiments in what human civilization could be. The Primarchs didn't rule these new societies. They guided, they protected, they taught. And sometimes they simply watched, letting humanity make its own mistakes and find its own solutions. Guilliman learned to let go of control, to trust that order could emerge from chaos without his constant management. The Lion learned that secrets could be shared, that trust could be built. Corvus found peace in helping others find justice rather than simply delivering vengeance. The Khan explored new frontiers, mapping possibilities rather than territories. Russ taught new generations that wildness and civilization could coexist. Vulkan showed that strength could be gentle, that power could serve rather than dominate. And Dorn built not fortresses but homes. The question that began this story was simple: which Primarchs will return and when? But the answer turned out to be something else entirely. They all returned, in one form or another, even the ones who died or fell to chaos. Because Primarchs were never just individuals. They were ideas made flesh, aspects of human potential given form, and ideas don't die. They transform, they evolve. They wait for the moment when they're needed again. The real question was never about their return. It was about what humanity would become once it stopped waiting for salvation from above and started building it from within. The Primarchs returned not to save the Imperium, but to witness its transformation into something their father never imagined and they themselves were still learning to understand. In the end, the galaxy learned what the Emperor had known from the beginning. Humanity's greatest strength isn't its ability to survive against impossible odds. It's the stubborn insistence on remaining human, even when being something else would be easier. Even when the universe itself suggests that consciousness should be ordered, efficient, logical. Humanity chooses mess and contradiction and beautiful failure. And somehow, impossibly, that choice creates meaning in a cosmos that has none. The Primarchs will continue to return as long as humanity needs to remember that lesson. Not as rulers or saviors, but as reminders of what we could be if we're brave enough to exceed even our Creator's expectations. And maybe that's the point. Maybe gods don't exist to be worshipped. They exist to show us we don't need them. The galaxy burns, it always has. But now, for the first time in 10,000 years, the fires are warming homes rather than consuming them. And in that light, humanity writes its own future, one choice at a time.